we have Martin O'Sullivan with us. Martin is working as a tech line specialist for IBM. You're very welcome, Martin.
Hello there, how's it going?
So maybe to start with, Martin, can you tell us a little bit why security is such an important thing to talk about in an online environment?
Well, with security, what you're talking about is protecting someone from acting against your interests. So for example, if you're buying something on a shop, you want to buy something from that shop and not have them just take your money and not give you the thing. And you also want to make sure that someone isn't pretending to be the shop you think that you're on. For example, let's say someone was pretending to be Tesco's and you thought you were going to get your groceries, and instead they just get your money and you get no groceries. And when you go to Tesco's go, well, you weren't on our website, we're on some website called TESSCOs or something like that. That's a common one that happens as well, if people pretend to be a different website. And there's a number of measures you can take to protect yourself against that sort of thing. The first thing would always be that if someone sends you a text, for example, the latest one going around is now because of Brexit, that you owe customs fees on a particular item that you're going to get. The best thing to do would be to contact that website themselves and ask them, say, oh, I've received this text to say that I owe custom fees. Can you confirm whether or not this is true? And most of the time they go, no, it's not true. That's just a spoof text. Some of the texts are actually being sent out in Irish now as well, which is interesting. So the first thing you've got to do is keep your head and go, when someone asks you for something in a hurry, well, it's not that urgent. Why is it a hurry? Why is it urgent? Why is there a hurry? Another thing you can do to protect yourself is if you get spam email, just delete it. Don't bother replying to it. Some people say, oh, you should report it. There's not really much of a point anymore. You just delete it and move on because it's your time.
Yes.
Another thing that I find is when you're doing, go ahead.
Go ahead, Martin.
When you're doing anything in security, it's always better to layer it. For example, if you're shopping on for example, let's say Vodafone, and you want to buy a phone, and I would always use Revolut. And the reason I use that is because I only put the money into Revolut that I want to spend on the shop. So for example, let's say the phone costs €50. I put €50 on my Revolut card, and then I use that card to buy the phone. So that if someone does manage to intercept the transaction, the maximum they can get is 50. They can't get into your bank account. They can't get anything else. So that's why I would always recommend people use kind of different things like Revolut and that sort of thing, because it adds a layer between you and anyone potentially getting your details. So even if they get your details.
That's really useful. We might just get into a couple more specifics in just a minute. Just when people hear about security risks, so I'm just thinking that maybe somebody who's been a little bit reticent to use online shopping, whenever they hear things about security risks and things like that, they might be thinking that they're never going to go near the internet again, and then others might simply never think about it. Where is the balance with that? How worried should we be about online security? Because you mentioned there that there are some common things that are happening. Is the internet rife with it? Is it going to be a risk and a danger every time you go online?
Well, it depends on where you're going. If you're going to Tesco's website and you have that bookmarked in your bookmarks file, you're always going to go pretty much to that website. It would be very hard for someone to get into a big website. Not impossible, but it would be very, very hard. And Tesco's themselves would have protection built in, because they would know that if someone got into their website and managed to steal, millions and millions of euro, they'd be on the hook for it, because their reputation is everything. So for a site that has a reputation to defend, you can be fairly sure that they have fairly robust security measures in place. But if you're on some smaller website that doesn't really have that much of a reputation to defend, or if they do get hacked, just can't afford to pay you back, then you're in bigger trouble. Now that's not to say big websites don't get hacked, but they have more money to invest in security. A lot of the smaller websites will use secure platforms because they know they can't secure them themselves, so they'll use a platform like Stripe or a few other payment processors who actually process the payment for them rather than processing it themselves. PayPal is another
like
one.
Outsourcing it.
Yeah, exactly. Google Pay is another one. There's a good few of these outsourced ones now that people know, because they know that they can't constantly be on the ball in terms of all the security, they have to outsource it to someone else.
Yeah. Is there any simple ways of knowing that the website that you're on is a safe one?
Well, they always say, check for the padlock in the bar. For a visually impaired person, you have to check that it starts with HTTPS. That is the sign that it's secure. The S stands for secure. What happens there is the website has a layer of encryption between you and the website. So it means that when you send data to it, it can't be read. There is a team, I work for IBM, and there is a team who actually are paid to break into their websites.
Right. Yeah.
And they use all the tricks that would be used in the wild to try and break into a website. And they often can get in. A lot of times these things can configurations on the website, but you've got to watch for example, if a website suddenly changes, or if a website suddenly has a whole pile of ads on it, that were never on it before, you have to be going, well, that's a bit suspicious. If a website, if you've heard about a data breach, for example, in America, Target was breached and they got 50 million names and credit card numbers. If you hear about a breach, you should always contact the company if you have had a relationship with them. For example, Target had social security numbers and they were breached. And they're a shop. It would be the equivalent of giving your PPS number to Dun Stores. There's no reason for you to ever give that data to Dun Stores. And that's another trick you have to use, is to limit the data that you're giving to a website. All they need is your phone number and email address. If they're asking for your PPS number, they're up to no good. We all remember what happened with Irish Water. If someone's asking for more information than they need to complete the transaction, there's something wrong with that.
Yeah. So sort of it's a nice kind of combination of sort of common sense, but also maybe just one or two little things to just check, like you mentioned, the HTTPS, just navigating to the address bar and just getting it to be read out if you're using a screen reader. Listen for the S, isn't it? So
yes, listen for the
that's
S.
a handy couple of tips there. We mentioned a couple of the risks already, but maybe just we could put a couple of terms to those risks, a couple of names to the risks that are there. So people will have heard about phishing, for example, phishing, as opposed to starting with F. So what is phishing?
Well, phishing is when you're phishing for details. You're trying to get someone to give them, because hacking a computer is surprisingly hard. If you were listening to the news or watching movies, you think it's just a matter of a couple of keystrokes. And sometimes that's all it is. But most of the time, even basic security can defeat most of the, as they call them, threat actors, people who want to do harm. But phishing is an easy way of getting someone to surrender their details for you. It's like you don't rob the house. You borrow the key to get in the door. And for example, in the real world, it would be people who hide their key under a flower pot. Well, the thief can get in because the key's under the flower pot. They just open the door, get in, take the stuff. They could even lock the door afterwards and put the key back under the flower pot. That has happened. And in cybersecurity terms, in phishing, they take something, i.e. transfer money from your bank account. They may not even want your money. What they may want to do is use your account to transfer money to someone else, and then they leave your money alone because they don't want to get caught. And if you're not watching your transactions, or you're not careful, you might not notice that €1 million has come into your account, gone out of your account, and you still have the same account balance. That's happened before as well. That's called money muling. And
that's
if that happens, you can get in serious trouble for it.
Yeah. So just what form would this take when we're talking about phishing and people kind of almost robbing your details or trying to get you to give them your details. What form does that take for the end user, for the person who's at home sitting on their computer? How will they first become aware of something like that?
They'd get a message from their bank or from some business that they had dealings with, and it would say, there's been a hack on our website and we need you to confirm all your details. And when you go into the form, now by the way, never click on those links because they can try and download stuff to your computer anyway, regardless of whether you fill in the form or not. But when you fill in the form, it'll ask you for everything. It'll ask you for your credit card number, your date of birth, all the security, your account, everything. It'll ask you for everything in the one form. And of course, once they have all that, they can then get into your account. So once again, if they're asking for too much data, it's like, well, the bank would already have this. And if they were hacked, why would they need you to reconfirm all that? They'd already have all this. It would be that someone else had stolen it. And they wouldn't delete it from the bank. They would just take it. Because if you delete it from the bank, it becomes useless to you. For example, if you went into AIB and you stole all the credit card numbers and then you deleted all the credit card numbers off the AIB bank system, well, you would have made the data you stole immediately useless because the credit card numbers would no longer work. You're going to delete the data. So there's no reason a bank would ever ask you to reconfirm that data.
Yes, yeah. So they're never going to have somehow lost your details that way. What if you get an email message or a text message or whatever form this message comes in, and you suspect that it is a phishing attempt? You mentioned earlier there's not really much point anymore in reporting those. Does that apply for all of these? Is that something even when you get like a text message through?
Well, for your own sake, you can stick it in your spam folder. But I wouldn't contact the bank and say, oh my God, I got this phishing message, because they say, oh yeah, there's hundreds of them out there. But if the message asks you to do something, right, you can always go to your bank's website itself by typing it in manually into the address bar and looking up the contact number, or if you have the contact number for your bank, contacting the bank, and you go to the bank and you ask them, I've got this message, and the bank will nearly always say, yeah, that's a scam. But you can nearly always tell anyway, because the spelling is usually terrible on them, and the punctuation, the grammar is usually pretty awful. Not always, but usually. And also, there's very good, if you go to YouTube, there's a very good guy called Jim Browning who explains a lot of these scams in great detail. And what he does is he actually gets the scammers to ring him, and then he records them as they go through their scam. And he sets up he has a fake bank account set up for this. So they think they're getting all his money. And of course it's a fake bank account. And at the end of the call, you hear the scammer usually cursing and swearing because they realize this guy has been wasting their time for about an hour. And he does this for a living. Scammers and things like that. And he puts the videos up on YouTube. So it is interesting to hear that, because the scams always follow the same script, and the script is quite simple. They want you to do something now, and they don't want you to talk to anyone about it. That's the key. They want to isolate you. They want you to not talk to anyone and make sure that you are in a panic. And when you're in the panic, you'll give them information that you otherwise wouldn't give them. That's the thing. There's always an urgency, and they always don't want you to talk to anyone, because of course if you talk to anyone, the other person would say that's a scam, just hang up the call. So normally when you get these calls, like someone rings up, oh, I'm from Microsoft and your computer is sending out viruses to the internet. Well, that's nonsense. And if that happens, the best thing to do is just go, thank you, and hang up. Just hang up, because there's no point in hanging up. And if you want to call someone, sometimes if you hang up and you pick up the phone too quickly, the person can still be on the line. So you dial in the number for your bank, and the other call hasn't terminated. So you have to be careful. You have to make sure that before you dial a number, you get a dial tone.
That's an interesting one as well. Yeah, very good. Yes. That's a good tip for people. Because I think as well, just as we're talking about this, the thing that you mentioned there about sometimes the most effective thing for the scammer is if they're able to get you into a bit of a panic, and then you don't think straight.
Yeah.
You might know about some of these security risks, but you're still maybe vulnerable even though you know about it. So what if somebody has actually responded to one of these emails, or they've maybe taken one of those calls, and it's kind of, is it already too late? Is there anything they can do at that point?
Well, the only thing you can do at that point is to contact, if it's, let's say, if it's a fake one from your bank, the only thing you can do is to contact your bank straight away and see if they can prevent the transaction from going any further, and they can start tracing it. In that situation where you have, you have contacted one of these people and you suddenly realize it's a scam, you do have to act very urgently. You have to contact your bank straight away and get them to stop everything, your cards, your everything. And it's a bit like, if you're in a car and, there's about to be an accident, well, you have to just slam on the brakes. You have to stop the car first, and then try and resolve the thing after that. You can't think, oh, well, maybe nothing will happen. You have to stop the car. You have to try and freeze everything, and prevent any further damage being caused. But damage could be done very, very quickly. So you're going to have to act, extremely fast. Get through to your bank, tell them that, your information has been stolen or whatever, and, explain, what happened, and ask them to freeze everything. Because that's the only way you can prevent, the problem becoming worse.
I guess sometimes people might be worried a little bit about the risk and kind of benefit scenario, or the balance of that, of okay, well, it's unlikely that was a scammer, and it's so inconvenient to go through all of this process and maybe even have to get my cards changed and things like that. Is there an element to that? Sometimes does that end up catching people out?
Yes, it can, because if you ring up the bank and they say we've no record of that call, you've been scammed. You have to assume then that you've been scammed. You have to check if there's no suspicious transactions on your account already. You got lucky, and you have to shut everything down. If there are suspicious transactions already on your account, then you have to stop any further taking place.
Yes. And
so you have to act quickly in that case. If you think it's a scam, even if it is a bit inconvenient, the bank can tell you, okay, there's, if the bank says, oh yeah, that was us, well then that's okay. If the bank says, no, that wasn't us, then you have no choice, because at some stage you're going to be hit. It doesn't matter if it takes a couple of days, a week, a month, at some stage there is going to be funny transactions on your account. And you'll have to explain them. So you're better
and
off.
There can be that delay sometimes as well, can't there? So you don't want to have too much of a false sense of security.
Exactly, yes.
Just mention something first. You talked about sometimes if you click on a link in an email and it might install software. Tell us a bit more about that. Is that what you call malware? Is that it?
Malware is for any software which has malicious intent. So any software that says, that wants to do something that you don't want to do it is malware. You could argue that some of the main social media websites have become malware with the way they're treating people's data. But the malware has malicious intent. It wants to do something to you. For example, it might want to log all your keystrokes. And the idea there would be to try and capture passwords, to try and capture data on you, and then once they capture that data, they want to use it nefariously. That's a slightly more sophisticated way than a phishing email, because they want to capture the data and they want to keep capturing it. So, for example, once they get onto your computer, they can continue to capture. So if you change your password, it doesn't matter. They've already got the new one you put in. So once that sort of stuff is on your computer, you have to get it removed with, malware removal software. There's no way that you can leave that on your computer, because it'll just keep taking stuff on you. You know, it's a bit like, you know, you have to stop the bleeding. You have to stop that, otherwise you just continuously lose your data.
Yeah. And is there kind of anything that's maybe a more proactive approach as well? So that's maybe if there is something that's come onto your computer, you can get it removed from a malware remover. How would you kind of protect yourself in the first place from malware?
Well, you can protect yourself with this. There's a tool and now in Windows 10, Windows Defender, which is quite good. You can purchase additional antivirus software. I think that the Windows Defender is quite good. But you also have to remember that there is no tool that can protect you from yourself. In the 12th century, the London Tower was breached because the people inside London Tower let the attackers in, and the expression was, there is no fortress that can survive betrayal. So you cannot have a tool on your computer that will protect you from yourself. If you act in a way that is not in your best interest, there's no tool can save you from that. So I think the very first tool you have to use to protect yourself is to understand that if someone is asking you for something, you have to understand, why are they asking you for it? Why has this suddenly come out of the blue? Why is it urgent? And another thing I would stress is, when you are getting rid of an old computer, it is absolutely paramount that you wipe it. And I'll give you an example. I have found computers before, old computers in the bin and things like that, got them working again, and contacted the owner of the computer to tell them that I found your computer in the bin. Using tools that would actually break open their passwords and get into their computer. And once I had their password, you know, I was able to ring them up. And what would happen is, you would ring them up and they would say, oh, how'd you find my computer? Oh, there's a password on it. And then you would hear the wheels in their head turning. Oh, wait a minute, he has my phone number. He must have my password. And you'd be saying, well, you know, the password doesn't really provide that much protection on a Windows computer. Now, this is older Windows computers. Windows 10, it does provide a lot more protection. But even still, with an older computer, someone can guess the password. And if they have it for long enough and they have physical access to the computer, they will eventually guess that password. So the best thing to do is to make sure the computer is wiped before you dispose of it. And there's lots of companies who actually reuse and recycle computers. They're always looking for them. And you can get them, you know, they will wipe it for you. They will securely, they'll give you a certificate and things like that to show that the computer has been erased properly. And it's just a way of protecting yourself. You know that this computer isn't going to come back in 10 years' time to bite you. Because you threw it away 10 years ago.
Yeah, very good. That's a really useful tip as well. And we'll maybe get a couple of final tips off you in a second, Martin. I think we might have had just a question come in there. Daniel, did we get a question?
We did indeed. We had a question in from Miriam, and she posed the question: are banks liable for transactions done online with their credit card if you do not receive the goods or services?
It depends on how the transaction was conducted. For example, you can have a services not rendered on a credit card, and you can come back and look for the money back. But it takes a long time. You're talking about, you know, maybe 6 to 8 weeks at least. And it's a pile of hassle to do, because you have to prove that it wasn't delivered, and, you know, you have to go through all sorts of hoops. It is much better off to avoid such a thing. But if a company, for some reason, doesn't provide the service and you're left with no other choice, yes, then you can do it. But it does depend on the company, it depends on the country, and it depends on the terms and conditions of your card. And also it may depend on whether or not you have protection insurance. Yeah.
So you're probably going back to your earlier point there, Martin, you know, about using the likes of Revolut or PayPal or something like that, maybe. Does the layer in between to help you there?
Yes. Yeah, because the layer in between is always, you know, when I'm ever doing anything, I always use the Revolut. And it's also a handy way. Let's say, you know, for example, your Netflix comes out, you know, in the middle of the month, but you get paid at the start of the month. You can always use your Revolut as a way of managing your finances as well, because, you know, you just put the money onto that and you go, okay, the Netflix will take it, you know, in the middle of the month when I have less money. and it means that you don't have to think about it and constantly be trying to calculate to make sure you don't spend too much money, because you can separate then out your spending money from your, your standing order, or your direct debit money, or things like that. So it's useful as a function for that as well, but it's really useful in terms of security because you're layering. And that's the key thing with security, is to layer it, not to have something that's really, really strong and then no security behind it, but you to have all these layers. For example, Wi-Fi passwords. A lot of people will continue with the default Wi-Fi password for their internet service provider, and it depending on your internet service provider. For example, Aircom, all the Wi-Fi passwords are uppercase letters and numbers, and they're letters between 0 to 9. So you've got all the numbers, but the letters are between A to F, because they're what's known as hexadecimal values. So that means that anyone who wants to hack an Aircom Wi-Fi can narrow down their search results. They know the password is going to be 10 digits long, and they know it's going to be numbers and letters, and the only letters they have to worry about are the letters between A and F. So they can narrow down the amount of time they need to attack it. Now, most people don't have to worry too much about their Wi-Fi being attacked, because the signal probably won't be strong enough outside their own house. But even still, it is best to make sure that your Wi-Fi password is reasonably secure and is not something that can be guessed. There are tools, there's a thing called Hashcat, which will guess passwords, and it can guess, 1 million passwords in about 20 seconds. So if you have something like that pointing at your Wi-Fi, eventually it's going to get in.
Goodness.
So that's why you use the longer the password you use, the better.
Yeah.
There was one.
For example, go ahead.
Yeah. There was one case there, just briefly going back to the credit cards and the websites, where somebody was purchasing. It would be a fairly expensive purchase, but it would be, a kind of a decent price. Now, not obviously too good to be true price, but when they went on to their website, to go to pay for it, next thing, oops, sorry, there's an issue with our payment system. Please phone such a number to complete, and they give you the order number. Next thing you phone up and you give them the credit card detail, and it comes back then, oh, sorry, actually, you might have got a text back from the bank. Did you get a text to your phone? You give them the text, and then it still gets declined, and they run it again. You get another text back, and what we found was that the excuse was, the first time was, we're charging you 800 sterling, let's say, and oh, sorry, that didn't go through in sterling, we'll try it in euro. But what you've actually done was hit your bank card twice, and the goods never arrive after that. So that's another one to watch out for, that's doing the rounds at the moment.
There's a lot in it, isn't there? There's a lot in this subject, actually, of online security. I just mentioned that we're just kind of running a little bit short on time at the moment, Martin. Could you give us just maybe the final couple of things that you would say to somebody, if you're because we've talked about a number of different threats, and there's loads more to this that we could talk about. But if you were to pick one or two sort of top tips for keeping yourself safe online, what would be your final word on it, if you like?
I would say layer your security, use Revolut, use different layers, and also use a password manager, and make your passwords, like all my passwords are 40 characters long, 40. The longer the better. The calculation I did on that would take a computer 5 billion years to guess your password. And in 5 billion years, I won't care. So, you have to make your passwords long, use a password manager, and have different passwords for everything. There's a very useful website called Have You Been Pwned? I'll email it on to you, and it'll actually tell you if your email has ever been involved in a data breach. And don't worry, everyone's email has been involved in a data breach. Everyone's.
Wow.
And it'll tell you what was stolen in that data breach.
Wow.
So I would really recommend that website. It's called Have You Been Pwned?
We might be able to put that onto our newsletter or something similar to get it out to people as well. So yeah, that'll be really good.
I'll send you on the link to it because it's really, really useful. At least it tells you if your website, if you find your website or your email has been in a website that was breached, then you can change the password. And if your password is the same on another website, you have to change it there as well.
Yeah, very good.
The biggest tips I would be, keep your passwords very long. Use a password manager. Bookmark your favorite banking websites and things like that, and always go to the bookmark rather than to the link in the email. If someone is asking you to do something really urgently, you just stop, because why are they asking to do it urgently? And finally, you always have to keep your head screwed on. You really do have to kind of keep one step ahead of them, because, as I said, there's loads of them. There's loads of different, and they're variations on a theme. They'll be slightly different, but they're variations on a theme.
Very good. Well, it's been great to talk to you, Martin. Really good to get that insight into keeping yourself safe online, and really appreciate you coming onto the show today, Martin.
One more question just before Martin goes. How do you spell revolut correctly for the listeners?
Revolut, R-E-V-O-L-U-T, I think it is. There's no E in it.
Okay.
It's a fairly big banking app. Now, as a visually impaired person, you're going to need a little bit of help setting it up, because it asks you to take a picture of yourself. And it asks you to put your face in a frame. So you will need some side of assistance. But apart from that, it is very useful, and the app is quite good. There are some accessibility issues with it, but mostly it's usable. I would use the Revolut because it's very, very handy.
Brilliant. Well, that's really good information. Thank you very much for that, Martin. And appreciate you coming on the show today.